Hey everyone, I'm Kim with Abundant Life Tarot, and I wanted to discuss moving a deck collection, and not just moving it down the street. I'm talking about moving it maybe across state lines, or in like my case, moving it from one country to another, or from mainland to an island. And I want to share with you some of my pain points, the things I learned, so that way if you find yourself in need of moving a whole collection, you'll have someone who has done it and who can help you on your own journey. So stay tuned. I've got some things to share with all of you. Okay, so the first thing that I have to mention, that is a must mention, first tip for moving a deck collection to a new country or to a new state, is you're going to probably need to downsize. You're going to need to downsize your collection. And if you have say under 20 decks, it's probably not a big deal. You probably don't need to downsize. But when you're starting to push 50 to 100 tarot and oracle decks, and you're one who likes to keep the boxes too, and if you're not really using all of those decks, now would be a good time to downsize if you are thinking about moving along, or like a long distance from where you're staying at now. So that is the tip that I have, the biggest tip. I had to downsize my collection from, I think it was at one point at 252, and now I've got it to like 160, the low 160s, which is still a lot. And, would I change anything about downsizing any further? No. The short answer is no. But could I have worked better all throughout 2021, or the 2020, the year that I started planning to move? Could I have started to work on downsizing well before then, starting to let go of decks that I'm not really called to work with, or that just doesn't resonate with me? I probably should have started that process a lot sooner than when I did. So that would be the one thing I would change about my experience in terms of downsizing. I am happy with the number of decks I have now, and I like the decks that I have now in my collection, and I have a plan of action on how to move them out if the time comes that it's time to let go of some more decks. So I feel good about it. But yeah, the only regret is not being more mindful about my downsizing before I started to embark on moving to live abroad. And sometimes we just don't know. We don't know what's around the corner. So I'm not going to beat myself up because maybe I just didn't know at the time, right? But now you know. It's time to take a look at your collection and be honest with yourself and let things go that is no longer bringing you joy. Okay, so next tip is to make sure that you are tracking your decks before you move. And this is another thing that you would probably consider doing well before you even embark on moving. Like, I would say start doing this now, which is to track your decks. Keep a log of the decks that you have, and then also track things such as purchase dates, the amounts you've paid, etc. Like I've shown you all in the past on the channel my own method of tracking my decks. And when I was moving to one country to another country, to the islands from California, I had already had a system in place of looking at all of my Oracle decks, all of my tarot decks, all of my Lenormand decks. And I then created a new spreadsheet of decks, of a working list of decks that I was either going to sell or give away, or that I was really planning on keeping and needing to figure out how I was going to get it to the new country. And then I had to determine which decks would have their boxes go with them. So it was a constant working, breathing document that I was working in. I will be showing that in a live stream. Probably when you're watching this video, you'll probably have already seen the live stream where I share how I worked with my spreadsheet, because it actually turned out to be a really cool document that I have now, that I can now track all the decks that I end up releasing and letting go, all the decks that have made their way here. And not all of my decks came at the same time. When I first came out here, I brought a good majority of my decks, and then I came back and brought probably another, 40 some odd decks back on the second trip back to my new home and my new country. So yeah, all that to say is that I don't care how you choose to track your decks, it's important to, for a number of reasons. One of the things is that when you are shipping internationally, so if you don't travel with your decks, meaning you don't travel with your decks on your method of transportation, a plane, a train, whatever, right? If you're shipping your decks, you're going to have to do something for customs, which is to break down and declare what it is in your package. And so it also helps to keep track of what you may have shipped. If you just throw a bunch of decks in a box and you don't have a tracking or an understanding of what's in there, or the weight or anything like that, you could end up with stolen items. You could end up dealing with customs issues where they're like, where is your declaration? You don't have to fill out their official form, but you need to declare items. And you should probably Google for the country that you're planning on moving to, what do they need to be declared on the form? And, so it's all those different considerations to think about when you're about to move. And if you've already started doing these things, like downsizing, like tracking your decks early on in your collecting experience, when the time comes to move, it's a snap. It's easy to track. So definitely check out one of my live streams where I'm talking about my spreadsheets and things to get some ideas on how you can make your own tracking system. This is definitely for those who have larger collections. Some people don't care that much, but I do. I also have insurance on my decks. So you could just think of all the myriad of reasons why tracking your decks early on is a great practice and a fun practice. I love seeing the long list of my little decks there and all their little important details. And I sometimes will think of some other new detail I want to capture, and I'll create a new column on my spreadsheet. And it's a thing. It's a thing. So track your decks. Next tip. So I was traveling by plane in both instances of moving my collection, my 163 decks, moving them from the US to the DR. And it's kind of scary because you just don't know. Like, you want to take as many as you can on the airplane. A, because you won't be dealing with customs. B, you'll have your decks right with you, so you don't have to do the whole waiting game of hoping and praying that your decks make it through shipping. But then if you are moving like we had sold most of our stuff, but we still had quite a bit of stuff in a lot of suitcases. So not only am I carrying heavy books, I'm carrying heavy decks. And so there's only so much you can take on the plane with you, because if you're traveling internationally, no matter how much you're willing to pay the plane or airline, they don't care about that. They have 50-pound limits for some flights, and, they're very, they're not super strict. Like they might forgive a couple of pounds over 50 pounds, but chances are they're not going to be pretty forgiving at like 60 pounds or something. I don't know. So you have to weigh, like literally weigh. We were weighing my luggage like a day before I flew back in December when I was visiting my dad. My poor dad and I are like lugging my luggage with all my decks in there and weighing it and propping it up on the scale to get it just right. So that was a sight to see, a memory for sure. And we got it. I had 3 large suitcases, all at 50 pounds. And thankfully my daughter and I packed really light. So we didn't really bring a lot of stuff, just maybe a few little toiletries, and most of the clothes we wore were from the States once we got to the States. So I had room in luggage, and I only paid $40 for an extra checked bag for me and my daughter. So it was her extra checked bag. And so, yeah, that worked for me in the second instance. But when we were first moving or considering moving out here and we sold all our stuff, I had to ship. And that's a whole experience, you guys. Like, you really, really have to, understand this clearly. You have to make sure you declare everything in the item. You have to understand that each item has to have an assigned value. And then if you're trying to be careful about not spending too much on customs taxes, you have to be careful about what is the tax trigger dollar the amount for that particular country. What's their amount that they are saying? Like, so if it's $200 of value stuff, so you have to look at that. You have to think about that. I'm getting all ahead of myself because I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to let you know. And for me, since I live in an island now, we had to use you have to use a courier, a mail courier, who will either fly or use a ship to bring our stuff over from the U.S. So I have like an address in Miami. Then from Miami, they ship it either on plane or boat. And then it takes some extra days to get to me. So my decks, when I first came out here, got stuck in customs, or got stuck because I didn't properly declare all of the decks that were in the boxes, and I didn't properly declare all the different items, and it was just a mess. And now I know what I know. So just Google it, you guys, and just save yourself a headache. But know that if you can carry your decks on the plane, hence why you want to downsize, that is your best bet. That's your best bet. Hands down, your best bet. To get on the plane with your decks so you don't have to worry about all the shipping and all the rigmarole. I still tracked the decks that went on the plane on my spreadsheet though, so I knew. In case something turned up missing. So that's how anal I can be. That is how anal I can be. So definitely compare the prices. Compare how much it would cost to ship versus how much it would cost to do an extra checked bag of luggage. So weigh it out and see which one works best for you financially. This is an easy enough tip. It's about being flexible. You need to be flexible. When you're getting ready to move a rather large collection from one place to another place, from point A to point B. Things are going to come up. For example, even though I had the experience of shipping a load of decks, I'm talking like 120, 130 decks, I don't know, a lot of decks. I shipped them here, and they got here eventually, and I learned from that. So when I went just recently to the States to visit my parents, where a lot of my decks were temporarily stored, I was able to be more flexible and decide, instead of shipping my decks again like I did before, I'm going to now see if I can get all of my decks on the plane this time. And at first I was kind of rigid about it. I had this whole plan of shipping. I even wrapped my decks up like as if they were going to be shipped and going on a plane and a boat and all of that. And then in the end, it was like I was listening to my best friend's advice, my sister's advice, and they were like, just try to downsize as best you can. So I sold quite a few decks at a bookstore, so that helped. And I didn't even give any away. I just sold a bunch to a bookstore that I love and adore, and it worked out. So be flexible. That's just one of many, many examples of how you can show up as flexibility in your shipping life, in your movement life, in your moving your deck collection life. Keep an open mind, research. Don't obsess too much though. Make a decision, but definitely, don't be so rigid and focused, because in the end, it could have cost me a lot more if I was so rigid. If I was like, oh no, I absolutely need to ship my decks, forget about check luggage, I want to ship all of these decks. And, so that's my example of being flexible. Be flexible. I touched upon packing. So I have packed decks before to make it to their new homes, like going across country lines, border lines, going across an ocean. And my decks have thankfully made it unscathed, even my boxes. So what I'll say is this, it's important to pack tight, wrap your decks in bubble wrap to keep things light in your boxes. You may want to consider, if you can, shipping. Like what I did the first time was I put my boxes and my guidebooks that were for sure going to come down with me to the island. So I ended up carrying those because they were a little bit lighter, and shipping the decks, just the decks wrapped up in bubble wrap and packed tightly in a box, just, a standard box like that. And that worked. So I had the boxes and then I had the decks. So that would be a main tip. I'm trying to think of other tips. And you can ask your questions in the comments about packing tips. But I find that you just get some good tape, your bubble wrap. Or I also, instead of bubble wrap, I used old fabric that I wasn't using anymore. I bought it for one purpose, didn't ever use it for that purpose, cut it up into sizes that were perfect for decks and wrapped it into extra cord I had lying around, and wrapped it and tied it. So it was cool. So I've done little unboxings on the channel about that experience of re-unboxing my decks once they got to where I was at. And it took months for them to get there. I shipped them like December 31st. Or no, it was January 2nd of 2021. And they didn't get to me till like March something of 2021. So you see what I'm saying? It's normally, now that I know how to declare properly and know how to ship and know all of that, it doesn't take nearly that long to get my packages. But yeah, so those are some packing tips. And like I said, I'm happy to help or give some additional guidance on packing tips. If you have questions, you can put them in the comment section. So this is more of just a heart-centered tip to you, from me to you. And it's to be honest and compassionate with yourself. This is a tip that you probably be like, why is this in the bunch of your tips? Because if you're like me and find yourself really in a crunch where you have to sell fast, or not, we didn't have to sell fast, but we end up selling fast, selling our home, selling all our stuff. And then I have this massive debt collection. And I had to be honest with the fact that, yeah, I have a huge collection and it needs to be addressed and dealt with. And what kind of life am I really trying to live? Do I want to live one where I can't really move as freely as I want to? Am I okay with that? How do I really feel about someone who is having 200, 300, 400 decks? This is no judgment, by the way, because I have climbing almost to 200 decks at 160 some odd decks, right? This is no judgment. This is just simply me navigating and moving through and trying to be honest with myself. What it is that I really want from life, what it is that I really need and want from my collection. So you start getting clear, and then you start being compassionate. There were times when I was like, no, I am going to sell 25 decks of the 44 that I had still remaining in the States when I moved here and left some decks in my parents' house. I had it in my mind when I was going back to go get the rest of the decks. I was going to sell 25 of those decks. And I got back to the States last month and I did not sell 25. I ended up falling back in love with many of the decks I said I was going to sell. And I had to be compassionate with myself and get real. And I was like, I still want these decks. This doesn't make any sense because I know it's going to make my luggage so heavy. And I'm going to have to pay an extra $40 US. But this is what I need right now. So I gave myself a little leeway and compassion and worked with myself on that. I hope that makes sense. Okay, finally, last practical tip, if possible, because this may not be possible for you. Store what you can. I was lucky because my parents kindly let me store my decks in some boxes, some independently produced boxes with the guidebooks in them, because they were so heavy. They made my luggage so heavy when I first was moving abroad that I left them behind. So I had like several containers at my parents' house, and I was able to store my decks there, be away from them for almost a year, and figure out what I want to do with them. Do I really want to try and bring them back? I decided I did. And then I started working with my spreadsheets to figure out, okay, are all of the ones that are still back in the States going to be able to come or not? Are they going to come on the plane, or am I going to ship them in a package? At the time, I thought I was going to be doing both. I ended up lucky enough getting rid or selling and saying goodbye to enough decks to make room, and so they all fit on the plane. So all of them were on the plane. Yay. But I was able to store what I could at my parents' house. So if you have the ability to store even just a few, then that's the part of the compassion. Have compassion for yourself and store. Now, if storing your decks means that you have to pay extra money to do so, then that's when you have to start. The stakes are high at that point, because now you have to start thinking about, is it really a good idea for me to be paying to store decks I'm not using, and do I really need to store these decks? Am I really feeling them like that? So there's that. So store what you can, but store what's appropriate, and if it's appropriate, meaning free or very nominal, or maybe you barter with a loved one or a friend where you say, look, if you allow me to store for a few months or up to a year my decks and my magical goodies, I'll do periodic readings for you or something like that, or energetic, cleanses and aura cleanses or something. I don't know. Just an idea. So, yeah, those are my tips. Those are my tips. So there you have it. Those are my tips for how to move a deck collection to a new location, new home country, new city. And I'm not talking about next door city. I'm talking about a new state. Just when you really have to start considering shipping your decks. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you have any additional tips, any ideas, suggestions for us fellow tarot and oracle collectors? We want to hear from you. We need to hear from you. So I want to hear from you in the comment section, because you guys always bring such good, insightful information. And this was a fun video for me to make, because it was how I could share a personal experience, but then also offer some helpful tips to you all about something I was going through. So it's kind of like a vlog too. It's like vlog / how to, Anywho, thanks so much for watching, you guys. And I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.